weeks and indeed months. We are now moving on to the 10-minute rule motion. Tim Farron.
I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide for mandatory targets and timescales for the ending of sewage discharges into waterways and coastal areas, to make provision about the powers of Ofwat to monitor and enforce compliance, to publish quarterly report on the impact of sewage discharges on the natural environment, animal welfare and human health, to require the membership of water companies' boards to include at least one representative of an environmental group and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, it is such a privilege to be in this place to speak for the people of the lakes and dales of Cumbria. Cumbria is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It is also, on occasions, one of the wettest. It needs to be. How else would we keep the lakes and tarns, meres, waters, rivers and becks filled and flowing? Home of 2 national parks and 2 World Heritage sites, Cumbria's waterways are nevertheless shamefully often polluted by sewage discharges, yet those discharges take place legally and without sanction. Our lakes and rivers are our natural treasures, yet water company bosses are degrading those natural treasures to keep a hold on their own treasure. Last year, the water companies made £2.7 billion of profit. They paid out £27 million in bonuses. Their chief executives earned 7-figure sums, and yet they are free by law to preside over enormous numbers of dangerous discharges that damage our environment, our wildlife, and are a threat to human life too. This bill aims to stop the water companies putting their personal treasure ahead of our natural treasure. The government chooses to let them get away with it. This bill will stop them. In 2021, raw sewage was pumped into the River Lune near Sedbergh in my constituency for 5,351 hours, the equivalent of 222 continuous days. And this isn't just a problem for me and my constituents, this is a colossal crisis affecting the entire country. Water companies pumped sewage into rivers nationwide 772,000 times in the last 2 years, more than 1,000 discharges each day. Some of those discharges lasted almost a whole year, all of them legal. Sewage discharges happen far too frequently and for far too long for the government and the water company to be able to credibly hide behind the excuse that these are caused only by exceptional rainfall. As a result, only 14% of England's rivers now meet the criteria to be defined as ecologically good. It's true that our sewage systems are shamelessly out of date, but the water companies responsible for improving them have little impetus to do so because the government is barely holding them to account. The British public don't just pay these companies to provide us with clean water, we also pay them to ensure safe and clean processes for wastewater and sewage. It feels that too often they have forgotten half the bargain, and this government lets them. United Utilities, our local water company in the North West, were the culprits for 4 of the 10 longest sewage discharges in 21, the most of any water company in the country. Meanwhile, they posted profits of £602 million and dished out £6 million in bonuses, also the most of any water company in the country. Far from being punished or held accountable for the degradation of our waterways, it looks to the public like water bosses are being rewarded for it. Those 772,000 discharges were legal. They happened under the government's nose, while the rest of us had to hold ours. The water companies also are guilty of emissions where they have broken the law, but they are very rarely held to account. Something of a theme, of course, for this government. Between 2018 and 21, there were only 11 fines issued to water companies for pumping sewage into our lakes and rivers. Only 3 of them were fines over £1 million, 4 of them fines of less than £50,000, so the government makes it cheaper for water companies to pay a fine than to take action to stop the discharges. No wonder they don't invest enough to clean up our lakes and rivers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that I left the lakes this morning without a coat because spring is here. The visitors are with us in Cumbria and summer is around the corner. The UK's waterways will soon be teeming with swimmers, dippers and paddlers, nowhere more so than in the English lakes, most of all in Windermere, at the heart of the most visited part of the UK outside of London. And Windermere has 3 designated bathing sites, all of them ranked as being of good standard. It is currently a safe place to visit, but the government's weak regulation is putting that at risk. On 71 days in 2020, United Utilities legally dumped sewage into Windermere. How can this be considered anything other than outrageous? The government allows discharges like these because they're considered storm events. Well, Cumbria gets more rainfall than in a month than most places, or many places, get in a year. And so that might strike, the things that might strike ministers in London as storm events are actually just mild drizzle for those of us in the lakes. But allowing water companies to hide behind storm events as an excuse to pollute our lakes and rivers, the government therefore shows its ignorance about communities like ours in Cumbria and allows the water companies to pollute Britain's wettest places the worst. Tourism and hospitality employs 60,000 people in Cumbria. It's by far our biggest employer. It is worth £3.5 billion to our local economy. I do not want this government to put that at risk by allowing our lakes to be polluted. I want the government to protect the well-being of everyone who visits the lakes and everyone who lives in the lakes. But as well as the human impact, there is an ecological impact. Maintaining the quality of our rivers, streams and lakes is crucial to protecting biodiversity for centuries to come. The Environmental Audit Committee reported that rivers in England are in a mess. 42 main salmon rivers in England, 39 of those 42 populations are categorised as being at risk or probably at risk, and when one part of the complex interconnected life of a river is damaged, the whole ecosystem is hurt, from duckweed and dragonflies to otters and trout. We must not be duped into thinking that the government took action to deal with this in the Environment Act. We remember that only by being dragged, kicking and screaming by members of the other place did they move an amendment, but that amendment is essentially meaningless. It sets no timescales or targets. It is a wish list, not an action plan. This bill will put that right and ensure that action is taken. It provides for mandatory targets and timescales for the ending of sewage discharges into waterways and coastal areas. This bill would also strengthen Ofwat, the Water Services Regulation Authority, to hold water companies accountable. Furthermore, it would take the radical step of placing representatives of local environmental groups on the boards of these companies so that executives will have nowhere to hide from the impact of their practices on our waterways, on the wildlife that depends upon them, and the economies and communities that they underpin. This bill would also help to get to the heart of the problem, not just the headlines. It will do that by making sure we get the right information. You see, government tells us the length of time that discharges have happened and how often they happen, but not the volume of sewage that is discharged into the watercourses. Without that information, we cannot know the scale of the problem. In small rivers and becks, in the confined space of a lake, volume will have a much bigger impact and a more damaging impact on humans, animals and ecology. Government and water companies both hide behind asking inadequate questions and therefore getting inadequate answers. For instance, the government's Environment Agency has to test for nutrients and chemicals in the water, but they do not have to test for bacteria. Yet it is bacteria which is the greatest health concern. Unless a watercourse is designated as bathing water, and there are barely any rivers that are designated as bathing water, then bacteria is only tested for by concerned citizens, such as the marvellous people I met on the River Kent in Staveley recently, who do just that. But testing for bacteria must become compulsory. The River Kent in Cumbria is designated as a site of special scientific interest. It hosts, among other things, protected species such as pearl mussels, which are rarer than the giant panda. And yet this is a protected river where sewage is being legally discharged almost every day. Mr Deputy Speaker, you can see then why my bill matters to my community and to the whole community, the country of the United Kingdom. The bill requires water companies to produce accurate, comprehensive, quarterly reports on the impact that sewage discharges have on animal welfare, human health and the environment. The public have a right to know what our water companies are being allowed to do, and hopefully with the cleansing impact of public scrutiny and the literally cleansing effect of water companies spending their money on upgrades rather than bonuses, the public will soon see encouraging signs to give them faith in our waterways and also renewed faith in our political system, that polluters will actually be held to account for dumping sewage into our lakes and rivers and no longer permitted, no matter how powerful the water companies may be. That companies making billions in profit would no longer be protected by a Conservative government which permits them to discharge sewage 772,000 times in 2 years. What then shall we protect? The inflated profits of water companies or the safety and beauty of our lakes and rivers? It is time for all of us in this House to take action and to pick a side.
This would be the opportunity for anybody wishing to oppose this 10-minute rule motion. I've been given no indication that anybody wishes to do so, and I see nobody, so I'll pose the question. And the question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As may I have that friend say aye? Oh, that's a bit lacklustre. We'll try that again. As may I have that friend say aye? Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Ed Davey, Daisy Cooper, Mr Alistair Carmichael, Sarah Green, Vera Hobhouse, Christine Jardine, Layla Moran, Helen Morgan, Sarah Olney, Jamie Stone, Manira Wilson and myself.
Behave.
Sewage Discharges Bill.
Second reading, what day?
Friday, 6th of May.
Friday the 6th of May. Thank you very much.